Hi, everyone. I'm going to wait for just a sec so people start logging in. All right. Great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It's very exciting. We've hosted a couple now, so this is the third one, and very excited to see that people keep signing in. And if it's not your first one and this is, you also attended the other ones, very happy to see you again. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen so you can see the same I see. And here we go. So this webinar is on how to communicate your ideas effectively in English, which is, it's quite ambitious as a topic, but I will narrow it down in a second to set the expectations and tell you what you can expect from this webinar. It will only take 45 minutes, around 45 minutes, and I hope you get something out of it. Right, let me start with a little introduction. See who we all are here in the room. And I want to talk about you, what kind of audience we have today, a tiny bit about me, and also who we are as a team at Talaera. And about you, you all come from very different backgrounds, different countries, different levels of English, but this specific webinar is aimed at people whose English is okay. So your English is okay. You know your vocabulary, you understand what I'm saying, but you still don't feel 100% confident when you want to express your ideas in English. When you're at work, you want to communicate more clearly and make sure people understand your point. So if this sounds like you, I'd say you're in the right place. A tiny bit about me. My name is Paula, and for those of you who haven't heard about me ever, I've been in the ESL, so English as a second language industry, for 10, 15 years, so almost for as far as I can remember. And I combine communication with psychology, plus having lived in a few countries here and there, to understand how people communicate, what is effective, what is not, and hopefully share those ideas with you. And at Talaera, we do have a few students in the audience, so you do know what this is about. But if you haven't heard of us, we are an online platform and we offer business English communication training for professionals all around the world. And the platform looks like this. A teacher and a student meet online. We match students with teachers depending on the needs, and then they work on whatever they need to work on related to communication. So they want to be more compelling in meetings. I'm scared of speaking up when I have a meeting with colleagues from the US, or I can't really understand the accent from the UK, or I want to deliver a brilliant presentation, or I want to update my LinkedIn profile to make it sound more attractive. Whatever it is that they need to work on, they meet online, and they also have a lot of materials that we customize for each student so that they can keep practicing. So this is a bit what we do, just to give you a quick overview. And I'd say let's jump straight to the content of the webinar. So as I said, how to communicate effectively in English. The first question is, what does effective communication mean, right? That could be many things. And when I was preparing this webinar, I remembered when I moved to Belgium. So I had been learning French for many years, and I had learned my vocabulary, I had done my grammar exercises. I thought it was pretty cool, to be honest. And then I got there and I started feeling that something was off. I was scared of speaking up, and sometimes I told jokes and people didn't get them. And I was like, all right, what's going on here? And for me, effective communication is about three main things. The first one is about being heard. I have the tools, I have the vocabulary. I've compared it to like a fishing analogy, right? So you might have great vocabulary, like a fishing rod, but then you don't know how to cast it. So it doesn't work for anything, right? So you need to be able to be heard. But you also need the good bait, right? You need to be understood and clear in your words. And even if they do like the bait, they just, you know, you don't get the fish. You need to be able to reel it in to get the fish. So this is a bit what I'll talk about how to be heard, how to be understood, and how to influence others. And influence others can be literally anything. Sometimes we want to make people laugh, we want to sell something, we want to provide feedback, and we want them to actually maybe change something. So every time we speak, every time we want to communicate, in some way or other, we do want to influence others. But what is stopping us from achieving effective communication? Oftentimes it's about the confidence. We still think in our native language, and it's too hard to get ourselves in the mindset of that language. We also feel like making some small grammar mistakes is going to make us sound stupid. Sometimes that stops us from actually communicating effectively. Sometimes it's also about the culture. There are a lot of cultural differences depending if we're talking with Asian people or Europeans or Americans. So what I want to cover here, this is what we'll do, is talk about how you can be heard through from starting to interrupting to returning to a topic. There's like how to cast the rod. Also about how to be understood, and that would be how to be clear with your words, how to repeat a topic, how to check if they understand, and also about influencing others. And that has to do with culture and adding power to your message. And before we start, I'm going to add a few questions here and there that you asked throughout the webinar, and I want to answer them as we go. I'll provide vocabulary and a lot of information. Don't worry about taking notes, because I will send you the slides at the end. So you will have all the vocabulary, you'll have time to think about everything that I'm going to say today. But to this question, how can I be confident and get rid of that fear of speaking in meetings? Remember these two. First, don't obsess over details. Seriously, it's okay if you say on instead of at, or if you just don't remember the word, it's okay. It's really okay. Don't obsess over the small things, and remember that everyone makes mistakes. I make mistakes, all native English speakers make mistakes. And if you're not a native speaker, people understand. They understand, so don't worry about that. But also over-prepare. And what I mean by over-prepare is be ready when you have an important meeting or a presentation. Write a little script, prepare some of the potential questions that they might ask you, and really look at how you would answer them. It's like not knowing what present you're going to deliver, but having the box and the way to present it, like maybe some phrases, some sentences that are ready to go. So when you get there, you're ready to use them. So remember, don't obsess over the small things, and be very prepared when you have an important meeting or a conversation. I didn't mention this earlier, but the whole communication topic that we're going to cover today is mainly focused on spoken communication. We did a webinar on writing emails, but this one is mainly about how to communicate when you're speaking. And let's start. How do you actually start speaking? You have a lot of ideas. And again, when I was in Belgium, the story that I mentioned just earlier, I did think for too long. I just wanted to remember how to do the correct grammar and put all the words together. By the time I was ready to start, I'd missed the boat. It was not the moment, and I just didn't share what I thought. So how about if you want to start speaking, use these sentences. This is one of the questions. How to use proper opening sentences to explain my ideas. Well, here's some vocabulary to start speaking. It's a good idea to learn these fixed expressions, and that's going to get you the foot in the door, right? It's going to give you the time to stop the room, have people look at you, and then it's your moment to think about what you want to say and say it. For example, today we're going to start off by looking at whatever, the budget, for example. To start off by is to begin by. Or I'd like to walk you through the sales figures. To walk someone through is to show them or talk about something. Did everyone get a copy of the agenda I sent around? Send around is to distribute to everybody. This is a very good practice when you have a conversation, like a meeting. It's very good to have an agenda, like a list of points where you write down what you're going to talk about. So you're ready and everyone else is ready. Let's get the ball rolling. Let's begin. Shall I start with my team's proposal? If you want to offer, if you want to suggest to start, or just let's start with. I'd like to show you is also a good sentence to start speaking. I feel that, the same as I think that, or also the way I see it, as in my opinion. So here you have a few that can help you just actually start speaking, forget about not feeling confident. Interrupting. How can I interrupt politely? I would also add, can I interrupt politely? And I can feel a huge difference, for example, when I have students from Asia versus when I have students from Israel. And the people from Asia, I feel in my sessions with them, they never interrupt me. They wait until the end, and sometimes they do share what they think, but they would never cut me when I'm speaking. While sometimes they just really speak and say, "Oh, just wait a sec, I have this doubt." It's not about being right or wrong. It's about knowing who you're talking to. If you feel that you're in a group and people do interrupt each other, then it's okay. If you do it politely, which we'll talk about in a sec. But if no one is interrupting anyone, be careful and mimic what the other people are doing. If you do really need to add something the moment they're speaking, if you really want to interrupt, a way to do it is wait till they need to, take a breath. When they breathe to keep speaking, instead of cutting them in the middle of a word. That's a bit more polite. And here you have a few ways to do it. You can say, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but," and then you say what you want to say. Or, "Sorry to interrupt, but may I ask a question?" May is a polite way to ask for permission. So I would use may in this situation. "Sorry for the interruption, but I have a quick question." Or, "Excuse me, but may I jump in here?" To jump in is to get involved. So sometimes they're providing information and you really need to add something to that because it's important. "May I jump in here?" "Can I just mention something?" It's also a way to interrupt. "That's a really good point. That would work well with," and then you insert your point. Careful with saying "that's a good point, but." When we say that "but" in English, it sounds like I don't agree with what you're saying, or I don't care what you're saying. So if you want to add information when you interrupt someone, I would say that's a really good point, or "that's a really good point, that would work well with." More like adding rather than saying the "but." So yeah, as I said, I'll send you the slides No worries about all this vocabulary that I'm saying, but these are really good ways of interrupting people. Very common as well, returning to a topic that you're trying to talk about and just people keep getting distracted. This was one of your questions. How to redirect the topic to what really interests us. Well, I also have some vocabulary for that. It's not going to be all about vocabulary, but it's good to start to cast that fishing rod from the beginning. For example, could we circle back to whatever topic, the retargeting campaign? Circle back to is to return to a topic. Also, let's take another look at the retargeting campaign. Take another look, it's to re-examine. Coming back to the retargeting campaign, I'd like to, when you add your point, building on what Tina said, it's like adding information. Like, all right, I heard what she said, and I also have something to add. Can we go back to that? Yeah, that's a really good point, Jack. That would work well with, and then you kind of like change the topic. This is similar to when you interrupt. And so we're good. We've started. People are looking at us. Now, what we say, the bait, needs to be good. How do we do that? Let's start with how to be clear. One of the issues a lot of my students have is because they don't feel confident, they start talking and they make things a little bit convoluted, and then it gets a little messy, right? And they've been talking for 10 minutes about nothing. So how can you be clear? Well, 3 simple tips to deliver a clear message. First, 1 point at a time. What do you want to say? Just one thing. And then you can add information later, but focus on one thing. Use simple language. It's really not about winning a prize. You don't need to use fancy vocabulary. The goal is that people really understand what you're saying. And the other one is tolling tactics. I'll talk about that in a sec, but it's just when your mind goes blank, you're like, oh, what was I going to say? What can you do in that situation? You can find the word. What do I mean by using simple language? So, okay, I pick one topic at a time, but then I read the other day this quote by Oscar Wilde. Says, I am so clever that sometimes I don't understand a single word of what I'm saying. And this has happened a couple of times, many times. I'm checking some of the writings from my students and I really cannot understand what it says. So I was like, all right, I'll ask the writer himself. And then we are there in the session and they read it and they're also, oh, what did I mean here? I don't know what I wanted to say. So if you don't know what you were trying to say, that's a sign that it wasn't clear enough. So how can you actually achieve that? How can you achieve delivering that clear message? First, pick the easy vocabulary. Utilize is correct, but it's a bit difficult. And you have use, that means the same, and it's much easier. Go for the easy vocabulary. Short phrases as well. If you can say it in 1 word instead of 3, much better. So instead of it was necessary that you can just say we had to. And also, this one is super important. Start with who, and then add an action. Very simple, but very effective. Before the termination of, there's really no action. That's a noun. There's no who's performing, who's terminating. So go for before we, that's the who, finish. And that's the action. For example, if you start with the sentence on top, you have, it is the opinion of the team that we should conduct surveys with our clients and put their proposals under consideration before the termination of the program. I don't know what this means. But if you start with the who and pick easy vocabulary, it becomes much more clear. Like, we think that we should survey our clients and consider their proposals before we finish the program. More simple. Stalling tactics. What do I mean by that? One of your questions was, my brain goes blank all the time when I need to speak English in front of people. What to do? Or how to continue after I don't find the right word when I'm in the middle of a conversation. This has happened many times to many people, also to me, quite a few times. So what do you do there? First, ask. Ask what? Ask anything. Ask them to repeat the question, even if you understood, but it helps you gain time. Ask the question or ask yourself a question, like a rhetorical question. So what do we mean by this? Repeat your words as well. Sometimes when you start a sentence and your mind goes blank, repeat the sentence again, and that sometimes helps you remember what you actually wanted to say. And this one is gold. Pause. When we feel that we are not confident, we want to fill all the gaps by speaking. We are scared of silence, but it's actually very powerful. One, because it helps you think, and also because it helps the other person actually come back to you and pay attention, collect their thoughts, and understand better what you're saying. So ask questions, repeat your point, and use silence and making pauses. One of the tips that I gave you here was repeat. Repeat what you said. That's very, very helpful when you want to make sure that the message is clear. And there's more than one way to do that. One is repeat using different words. I'll give you an example. The other one is repeat changing the structure. And the other one is to summarize, to make it shorter. For example, it seems that we'll need to adjust the plan. Say it again with different words. It looks like we'll need to tweak, as to adjust, the strategy. The plan, the strategy, same thing. What else? Repeat changing the structure. For example, this system makes it simplest to establish a dedicated network connection. You say that and you look at the other people and they're like, I don't know what this means. So you want to clarify. Say, oh, what I meant is that you can simply establish a dedicated network connection with the system. You're saying the same, but you did change the structure of the sentence a little bit. Or you can also summarize. Sometimes you gave an amazing introduction and you gave reasons and you did all that, but I can't read here, but sometimes you can just make it much shorter with, the point is we should close the deal with ComFood and help them build their home delivery platform. So repeat the same using different words, repeat but changing the structure, and summarize. This is not easy at the beginning. I do this a lot in my sessions, and if you want to practice, just send me a quick email and I can tell you how you can work on this later after the webinar. And if you want to say that you're going to repeat your ideas, you could say, oh, let me say that again. Or in other words, what I wanted to say is, what I mean is. Yeah, like, let me say that again. That's very useful. It was a bit messy. Let me say that again. Basically, the idea in a nutshell is, this is very useful when you want to summarize, when you want to just give the main idea in a few words. The bottom line is very similar to the previous one. It means the most important point. As I mentioned earlier, when you want to repeat your point, and as I said, have a little mark there, because this one sometimes can come across as rude. And I had this conversation actually yesterday with one of my students, and we were not sure, like, why is it rude in some situations? And we came to the conclusion that when you're repeating your own words, it's okay, it's fine. So as I said, you can use this vocabulary to repeat your ideas. But when you're replying to someone, trying to correct them, you say, oh, but as I said, or as I mentioned earlier, that's when it comes rude. Again, repeating your ideas, it's okay. But replying to someone else, trying to correct them with these sentences, that is when it can be rude. So we've delivered a clear message. We've repeated our message, but was that clear? Did they actually understand? Did they like the debate? How do you check understanding? This is one of your questions as well. How can I be sure if I was clear politely? Can you ask directly, do you understand what I mean? You can, but it's not as polite as it can be. What do I mean by that? In English, we often, depending on the country, but we do try to be as polite as we can. So instead of saying, do you need help? We say, how can I help you? So we are not putting the stress on the other person, but on us. And instead of saying, do you understand what I mean? Like, were you able to understand? These options here are a bit friendlier. For example, does that make sense? Or are we all on the same page? Like, do we all agree? Are there any questions? Is this clear? And I added two more. These two. So I can make sure I communicated clearly. Would you please tell me what you understood? Or I want to make sure I made myself clear. Can you please tell me what you heard me say? These two sound a bit harsh in English, so be careful with when you use them. When I hear these two sentences, I imagine either my boss telling me off or my mom also telling me off. So maybe you've heard them in the context of a boss or a manager telling that to their employees, but if you can avoid it, it's better to do that. Also, asking people to repeat what you said, people can feel a bit in the spotlight. Maybe they were listening, but at that point they just got lost. So be careful with those. And I would stick to, does that make sense? Are we all on the same page? Repeat your message. Send a recap if it's important information. Just send them a quick email saying, all right, this is what we talked about. I hope everything's clear. Let me know if you have any questions. So we cast the fishing rod. That's fine. We started speaking. People hopefully understood what we wanted to say. So they liked the bait, and that was clear. But now, how do we influence others? How do we get them to do what we wanted to do? I said that I wanted to talk about two main points. One is the culture, and the other one is a few tips. Here's where the psychology also comes into place when it comes to communication. So, about the culture. With divide I'm not going to go too much into detail about this. If you are interested, we could do a webinar on it. Just send me as well a quick message saying, I'm interested in this. Can we please talk more about this? But countries are divided into high context countries and low context. This is a continuum. It's not A or B. But we can see that the tendencies go towards high context countries and low context. What does this mean? High context, like Japan or a lot of countries in Asia, some Arab countries, Spain, Greece. In these areas, communication is a little bit more indirect. People use a lot of body language. Everyone's more cooperative. Let's all be in the same boat. This is interesting for all of us. And even though at the beginning it might be a bit difficult to get to know the people, then once you actually have a relationship with someone, whether it's business or friendship, it tends to last for a long time. But then negotiations are slower, people give a lot of explanations, and they tend to be more rooted in tradition. While in low context countries like Germany, Sweden, the US, Switzerland, they tend to be more open. They use a lot of words, but they're also more competitive. So it's more about, you know, that competition of who's the best. And they also respect their personal space a lot. Let me move this quickly so that we can see. It's much faster. Things go faster. Depending on the country, this is more true or less, but they do like change, and they like, you know, things to be dynamic. What does this have to do with effective communication? Well, understanding how people are in different areas will help you adapt your message to some or others. So if you're explaining something to Asia, you might want to give a longer introduction and, you know, be a little bit more patient. While if you're dealing with a country like the US, you might want to be quicker, use lots of words, and do things a bit faster. And also adapt your message towards change. Apart from that high and low context, depending on where you are, sometimes words don't mean what you expect. Like, yes. And I moved from the US to Vietnam. I lived there for about 3 years. And for me, yes meant yes, right? So for me, it meant either I understand, I agree, or I will do it. But after a few months living there, I'm like, they said yes, but they didn't do it. Did they understand? Maybe I found out later that they hadn't understood my message. I was like, oh, but they said yes, so I couldn't understand. And that's because in some areas, like in China or in Japan, the Philippines, sometimes in Vietnam as well, yes only means I hear you. So be careful when they reply yes. Also with no, of course, we cannot look at what all words mean in different contexts. So if you know, if you do want more information about that, we can definitely help you with it. And I decided to look at how different sentences mean different things in different countries, not only in different situations, but also in different countries. So one thing is what we say, the words we choose, and the other thing is what we actually mean. And this can be very confusing for some people. If you hear an American person say, that's a good point, usually it doesn't mean that they think it's a good or a bad point. It just means I heard you. That's a great point, but adding the but, we mentioned this earlier, it means I don't really agree, and here's my point. That's interesting means oftentimes I don't like what you're saying, and I'm about to pitch another option to you. So if you hear, that's interesting, it's like, here comes my point, and I think I'm right, and you're not. That's amazing. Can be that's amazing, but it can also be, okay, cool. Like, I just got a new t-shirt. Oh, that's amazing. It just means, all right, cool. We'll definitely think about it. Means we might think about it, or we might not. Definitely in the US sometimes means probably. A second means around 5 to 10 minutes. It took forever. It means it took more than 1 hour. And later, it's usually likely never. So as I said, adapt your message to who you're talking to. But Germans, on the other hand, tend to be a bit less enthusiastic and they tend to be more consequential with what they say. So when they say that's a good point, it really means that they believe it's a good point. Or if they say, I'll be there in 10 minutes, they'll be there in 10 minutes. If they say this is important, it means this is of prime importance and we must address it. And this is also a true story. I had a session not long ago with a student from Germany, and he's a manager of a big company, and he was announcing a crucial activity. It was very important that everyone followed through. He had the presentation, we were working on it together, and he said, remember, this is important. And that was it. His whole team was international. And for him to be able to convey what he meant, he had to adapt the message. And instead of saying, this is important, which is what works in his country, and change it to, this is crucial, this is vital, this is really, really important. Also, if a German person says, we will do it, it means we will definitely do it within the timeline agreed. And of course, you'll meet some people that do not follow these, because that's what happens with culture. But it is super useful to know what kind of audience you're dealing with to then be much more effective. And apart from the culture, there's also a few little tricks that you can apply to add that power and to get the fish. These four, they're not too difficult. How can you add power to your message? The power of because. To explain this, I want to show you a study. You might have heard it before. And this woman, Lady Langer, she did a study in 1978. That's a while ago. And she wanted to experiment the power of because. How compelling is it? How can we influence people by using the word because? And if you imagine, it was a room where there was a printing machine, a Xerox, and there was a line. And this person came in and she wanted to cut the line, right? She wanted to go straight to the front and print something or copy something. And in the first situation, she just said, excuse me, I have five pages. May I use the Xerox machine? In the second situation, she said the same. Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? That's a pretty valid reason. But in the third situation, she said, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies? Why else would you be in the room, right? That's really not a valid answer or a valid reason. So she wanted to see the effect that those different sentences had on people. And she found that in the first situation, 60% of people said yes. But in the second one, 94% of people said yes. What do you think about the third one? 93% of people also said yes. Yes, you can cut the line because you have to make copies. So what this teaches us is that sometimes the reason itself is not as important as actually just giving one reason. So instead of, can you please sign up? Versus, can you please sign up because we need to book the room according to how many people we are, is much more compelling. The second one. Of course, the bigger the favor, the more you have to work on your because phrase. But if it's something small, just adding because will make a huge difference. Use the word because, give them a reason, tell them the benefits that everyone's getting from it. And be aware also of the power of you versus I and we. What do I mean by this? When you use you are involving the other person, but sometimes you're also attacking the other person. What do I mean by this? When you use you, for example, when you're selling something is much more effective than using I. So if you see at the top, I am going to talk about our program. What does this have to do with me? Versus, have you ever had a problem we'll help you fix? You can improve your skills with this program. We get them involved. But it can also be a bit tricky because this has also to do with the culture. And in some places, people feel very, they can feel very attacked because they are more indirect. Well, we talked about being indirect. So if you want to, I don't want to say attack, but if you want to criticize something or someone, using we and making it more inclusive can make them feel a little bit less attacked. So instead of you sent us the wrong version of the interview versus, oh, we need the latest version of the interview, saying that was the wrong one, but we need the latest version of the interview. Can you please send us the correct one? Much nicer. So be aware of those differences and when it is useful to use you versus when it is useful to use I or we. This is also a powerful tip that consists of presenting information in groups of 3. Maybe your product has a million features and offers a million solutions. People will remember better when you tell them just 3. Pick the 3 best ones. Or when you're also giving an update on your project. You might have done a million things, but they will probably just remember 3. Sometimes you need to say it all, but at the end, it's better if you pick 3 or 6. So if you see this webinar has 3 parts, and I like to use 3 as a tool to help people remember what we said. And probably the most important one from the webinar is to add what next. And it might sound obvious, but we sometimes forget it. We delivered a great message. We were able to make clear and everyone understood what we said, and we added power, we understand the culture. But then the other person is there thinking, what do I do with this? Give them what's going to happen next, very simply and very straightforward. So if they need to send you a copy, repeat it at the end. Please send me a copy. Same for emails, same for phone conversations, same for meetings or a sales pitch. Add what next at the end. Very important. And if you were to remember a few things from this webinar, what would it be? First, don't obsess over mistakes. Don't worry about in, at. Of course, it's good to prepare, and the more ready you are, the better, but don't worry about the little things. And as I said, over prepare. Have some sentences ready and try to, in your head, try to think of different ways of explaining something. When you say that's a good point, try to skip the but, because it sounds more like a criticism. So, oh, that's a good point, and that goes well with this and that. As I said before, it's okay when you want to repeat what you said. So as I said before, blocks of 3 are good. But if you remember what I mentioned is that when you're trying to correct someone, it can be a bit, sometimes even a bit arrogant, the way we say it, or a little bit aggressive. So remember that. To deliver a clear message, choose one idea, one point at a time. Pick the simple structure, the simple vocabulary, and the simple message. Start with who and add an action, and use pause. Sometimes we feel like we stopped for 10 minutes. It's okay. You're giving them a break to think and collect their thoughts. Be aware of the culture, how different people communicate depending on where they are, and add power with because, with groups of 3, and adding what next. And that's my point, my very last point. from this 6. Now, what next? I told you to keep improving. And the way to do it, or the way that I can offer, is first, webinar slides. I'm going to send you all these webinar slides. So have a look at them. Try to memorize some of the phrases that I gave here. Start applying a few of the tips. I will also send you an email with free resources. We have a blog that we keep updating. I can invite you to future webinars if you're interested. That we have in the future. And if you really want to take it to the next level, you can have individual lessons with our teachers, have premium access to our content, and you can either email me, or we have info@talaera.com, and we'll tell you all about it. And before we finish, we do have social media. I'm also behind that as well. I do take care of some of the marketing stuff. And, if you want to get more free content, if you want information, we're always here. I want to thank you so much for being here. I hope you learned at least a little bit today. And I hope you have a great day. I hope to see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.